Greetings, everyone. My name is Joseph Mass, and the gentleman in your frame is Ben Shapiro, as I understand. And I've actually done a video regarding Ben Shapiro before. Really impressed with his debate skills, his argumentative skills, and which, generally, if you're a good debater, you usually have some decent skills at research. Unless you got some sort of team working, but you do your research and so forth, and which is troubling to me in this particular piece that you see him. He is at, I think, some university, and he's about to, in his mind, debunk the idea or the concept of white privilege. Now, I know that white privilege is a word that a lot of people, get offended, but the reality is. Well, let's do it this way. Instead of white privilege, let's say class privilege. I'm going to build on that, because while he is going to argue that white privilege doesn't exist, I'm going to show his argument to be fallacious. And matter of fact, the video is 21 minutes. I'm not going to need but like the first maybe minute of his video, because right out of the gate, his claims are fallacious. And so if I shut down the initial claim, white privilege does not exist, then the rest of it is just moot. I mean, in other words, I'm not going to go through this whole video. He says a lot of stuff, a lot of things are skewed, a lot of things are misinformation. He's misinformed or just presenting misinformation. Now, but this is not going to take long. I mean, just in the first minute or so of the video, I'm going to show that his position is fallacious. And so let's listen to him basically open up.
White privilege. Enjoy.
So first of all, let's start with the notion of white privilege, which has become this buzzword that you hear all the time now. White privilege is responsible for everything up to and including the Kardashians. It's responsible for everything, white privilege. White privilege is a way to silence anybody who is not of color. That's what white privilege is. It is just a leftist bullshit term that means shut up because you are not a member of a minority group, a privileged minority group.
A privileged minority group. Now, he just made the statement basically saying white privilege doesn't exist, and he went on and said some other things about it. That's probably the most ridiculous argument or opening I've heard, certainly on this issue. Let me share something here as we move into this. I'm just going to read. I wrote this, but I'm going to read it just right off the sheet, and then I'm going to probably touch on a few things, and then we're going to get back to Mr. Shapiro. The breakdown, white privilege. In America, what is known as white privilege can also be called class privilege. Now, that's important, folks. Class privilege. Keep that in mind, because I understand, and I can understand how white privilege it would rub a person. It is not to say it doesn't exist. It's not to say it's not real. But I can understand how that could be a sensitive matter to someone, a Caucasian. But so white privilege is the same as class privilege. Let's keep that in mind. In America, what is known as white privilege can also be called class privilege. In other words, a particular class, a class of people. Class privilege. Privilege that goes to a particular class. Class privilege is actually not relegated to a particular race and may not even involve race as its determining factor. Now, that's important, and hopefully that will take some of the harshness for our Caucasian brothers and sisters off of this business of class privilege. In America, it's white privilege, but class privilege. Now, I say class privilege, and as you know, I wrote here that it's not relegated to a particular race. It's not just Caucasians. Class privilege, depending on where you are in the world, say for example, if you're in India, the phrase could be brown privilege. Why? Because in India, there's a caste system. And pretty much everybody in that caste system, no matter what tier or what in that hierarchy where you fall, all of them are Indians. Now, there may be some other races involved or whatever, but for the most part, the caste system is the Indians. But within the Indian race, see, this is not even based on race. Within the Indian race, there's different levels or different positions, different castes that I think the Brahmin is the top. I think, they're different, and so the higher you up in this caste system, folks, the more privilege you see. The more, because see, we're gonna let me continue to read, and we're gonna see something. Class privilege exists in every society on the planet. Watch this, that has a ruling class. See, I don't care where you are in the world. That's why class privilege, it just happens to be white privilege in the U.S. because the ruling class, folks, whether, has traditionally, and I would argue still is in many ways, the ruling class has been Caucasians. Ruling class does not represent, the concept of ruling class does not represent a dictator or this, that, and the other, or some situation like that. It just simply represents the class that has the majority, if you will, or most, I won't say all, but has the most power in reference to politics, in reference to the corporate realm, business, in reference to even education, and you could even say military. The class that has the greater power or has the most influence over these elements, government, education, the corporate world, and again, even military. That's the ruling class. Folks, in America, the ruling class, and we're going to look at this, the ruling class has been the Caucasian race. That's just simple as that. So, but that's America. If you're in Asia, I don't know about Asian. If you are in India, let's go back to that example, and you are of the upper, in the upper caste system. In this caste system, you're in the upper, you at the top. Then you are in that realm where you are basically the ruling class over that society. And whoever is the ruling class, folks, are going to experience privilege, class privilege. Whoever is the ruling class is going to experience class privilege. Why? Because the ruling class makes the rules. We're going to look at that in a moment. Did I read this? Class privilege involves certain considerations and or favorable allowances granted to members of the ruling class and denied in part or in total those outside the ruling class. If there's a ruling class, and I don't care, it's not just U.S. or America, in any society across the globe, if there's a ruling class, there's going to be class privilege that goes towards that class. If it's in Africa, say it's a tribal, a warlord that's black, then it's black privilege. In India, if you at the top of that hierarchy of class system, of caste system, then it's going to be brown privilege, because whoever is the ruling class is going to experience the privilege. Why? Because the ruling class pass and makes rules that favor the ruling class. That's in every society, folks. That's not just Caucasian white folks, so they can take that aspect of any guilt off of them. It's not just them Caucasians. It's black folks in Africa. If there's a warlord that it represents the ruling class in this area or region, I guarantee you the ruling class is going to make legislation, pass laws controlling the government, having control and influence over the corporate realm, having influence over education, having influence over all of these different entities and dynamics that comprise a society, and they are going to favor and pass legislation that favors the ruling class. Folks, that's across the globe. You can't argue and say that doesn't exist. That exists in every society. How can you argue that class privilege towards the ruling class of that society doesn't exist? It exists everywhere. And so, since in the U.S. it's known Caucasians have been of that ruling class, so there are privileges that's associated with that, hence white privilege. Let's listen.
In the leftist space, it's reverse racism of the highest order. You're basically saying to white people who aren't racist, and you can't find any proof of their racism, that they must be racist because they're white.
Okay, now that's a fallacious claim. The idea that because you identify or assert that white privilege or class privilege, depending on where you are in the world, we just in the U.S., asserting that class privilege exists, and it happens to be in the U.S. that the white race or the Caucasian race is that ruling class, and so there are privileges that go. I'm gonna prove it in a minute, folks. But to assert that because you identify that and you say that it exists, that makes you a racist, and you're calling those of that class racist, that's just not true. You can be of the ruling class and not have a prejudiced bone in your body. But because you're of the ruling class, as I read, there are certain allowances and considerations that goes out towards those in the ruling class, even if they themselves have nothing to do with this structure being put in place or existing, even if they have nothing to do with it, just by virtue of their color. If it's based on race, like I said, in India, it has nothing to do with color. Everybody's brown for the most part, but the ruling class is brown, so you could say brown privilege. But in actuality, all of those in the class systems are pretty much brown. So it's not even race in that realm. Religion or other factors, but it's not race. It just happens to be so in America. In America, it's the ruling class was established on the order of race. We're going to look at that in a moment. And it happens to be that the Caucasian race was the ruling, and you could say is the ruling class. And so that has not been, and let me read this. There is no such thing as a ruling class without class privilege. Therefore, since the white race has held the position of ruling class in America from its beginning, it can be concluded that class privilege of a white variety, white privilege, does in fact exist. The Caucasian race has been the ruling class in America since its beginning. And there's always privilege that go. Folks, you can study any people group, any society throughout history. There's always privilege that goes towards the ruling class because they make the rules, and they're always going to inject in those rules certain privileges, and I'm going to show you in a moment. Let's see if I need any more of what he has to say.
That is called racism. If you are accusing somebody of something simply because of the color of their skin without any evidence, that's called racism.
Okay, I can agree that if you just attacking someone or accusing someone because of blaming them for something because of the color of the skin, that's racism. This has nothing to do with racism. Nobody is accusing or blaming anyone of anything. We're just making an observation of society. It's there. Acknowledging that it's there because there's ample evidence to prove it has nothing to do with racism. Has nothing to do with me being a racist. Has nothing to do with me saying that everyone that benefits from class privilege, in this case in the U.S., white privilege, that they are somehow racist. Now, I will say that the system was built on racism, but because you benefit from it does not necessarily make you a racist. If you perpetuate the system, then you very well can be a racist if you're perpetuating it. Now, we're going to look at that in a moment because, see, one of the easiest things to do in proving this is to just go to the evidence. That's the easiest. What kind of time I got? Wow, I'm already at 15 minutes, but I got to do this. The easiest thing to do is to go to the evidence. Now, I'm going to do three things. I'm going to go to 3 periods in American history and prove that not only is the Caucasian race the ruling class, or has been from the beginning of the nation, but there have been privileges that have gone out regarding that. White privilege, if you want to call it. Okay, now let's go to 1857. On March 6, 1857. Now, we're going to read a decision of the court. This is the Supreme Court, written by Supreme Court Justice Roger Taney. Okay, in this decision of the court, the white race is clearly going to be established as the ruling class with privileges. Watch this. That others outside that race didn't get. Now watch this. This is, again, and let me just spill the beans. Folks, this is the Dred Scott decision. I'm not going to read it all. If you know anything about history, you know the Dred Scott decision. All right. African Americans had for more than a century before been regarded as beings of an inferior order. Now, folks, this is the law. This is the decision by the Supreme Court, the highest court in this land, establishing legislation, our Constitution, and this is regarding and directed at African Americans. African Americans had for more than a century before been regarded as beings of an inferior order and altogether unfit to associate with the white race. Unfit to associate with the white race, either in social or political relations, and so far inferior that they had no rights which the white man was bound. Folks, this is a decision from the Supreme Court reflecting the law of the land that black folks has no rights that, let me read it, which the white man was bound to respect. No rights. This is the law of the land. Supreme Court, highest court. Now, do I need to highlight or show you who's the ruling class here? Are we going to be foolish and stupid and act like this? I'm just making this up. The ruling class here, folks, obviously is the white race, Caucasian race. They get to say they're citizens. Black folks doesn't get to say they're citizens. That's called white privilege, folks. I mean, chew on it or choke on it, whatever you want to do, but facts are facts. All right, if I were to read on, and that the Negro might justly and lawfully be reduced to slavery reduced to slavery for my benefit. Ain't that something? He was brought and sold and treated as an ordinary. Okay, anyway, that's enough of that. All right, white privilege. Now, you don't have to agree with it. That's there clear as day. It was the law of the land in 1857. Now, you going all the way back to the past. It doesn't matter. I've already debunked him. He said it was a myth, that it never existed. It did exist, folks. Come on, wake up. This man has too much skill to have missed that. He just doesn't want to see the truth. All right. Now, let's go up a little bit further. Let's go up to let's say 1960. Well, let me back up a little bit. Let's go to 1955. Let's go to 1954. Okay, 1954. I think that was the Brown versus Board of Education. So that was somewhat of a victory. We were starting to get some movement. Brown versus Board of Education. Separate equal is unconstitutional. That was good. But let's look at this aspect of society at this time. 1954 in Montgomery, black folks had to ride in the back of the bus. White folks got to ride wherever they want, even in the back of the bus if they ran, and we had to move. You don't see privilege in that? Not for us, but you don't see white privilege in that. You don't see that. I'm just making stuff up. You don't see that. Okay, well, let's go a little bit further. In restaurants, we could spend our money. Our money was good, but we couldn't sit down in a restaurant. Matter of fact, we had to order our food from the back door of the restaurant. Couldn't go in. This is 1950, 55. So we don't see the privilege in that. The white privilege in that. We don't see that. Oh, it's a myth. He just got debunked. That's twice. I mean, that's foolishness what he's talking about. Okay, let's take it on up a little bit further. You might say, well, you still up in the past. Well, folks, it's American history. It's a part of what went on in America. And it's still going on. And the last thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to prove it to this day. This is a study that came out in this year, 2018. I'm going to read it in a moment. But he's already debunked. Okay, Ben Shapiro, he just said white privilege doesn't exist. Folks, I just gave you, and I'm gonna add a fourth. I'm gonna add one that I put on another video. I'm gonna add a fourth to close out. Okay, let's come on up to 2015. 2018. White privilege is a myth. Okay. Now, I'm just gonna read. This is an article that you can go to by the Washington Post. The title of the article is this: Redlining was banned 50 years ago. It's still hurting minorities today. Now, if you know what redlining is, back in the 30s, lending institutions and those over, I would imagine you would say over real estate, they begin to redline, they begin to map out communities and color code them. And areas where black folks, basically black people live, was called the red area. It's the undesirable area. Okay, and there was a green area. I think it was green for whites, and it might have been white on it. But so it was designed, and black areas was designed as unfavorable. Now, the way this works. Now, keep in mind, they said this is still affecting African Americans to this day, and it absolutely is. I don't have time. I've already gone way over my time even now. I don't have time to go all into all of this. But redlining basically created the wealth gap. That's another story. But basically, black people were in these red zones. Lending institutions would not lend them. It was two things that created the wealth gap in the 30s moving forward. Line of credit and loans that black people were denied, or for the most part. We didn't have access to loans that we could buy homes, property, and so forth, and develop generational wealth. Didn't have that. Some might have. I'm sure some exceptions, but for the most part, they didn't. That's what this article just said. These areas that were designated red, these areas to this very day, 2018, is still poor, underdeveloped, because in these red areas, what happened was black people couldn't get loans, so they couldn't upward mobile. They couldn't be upward mobile. Upward mobility, they were denied. They couldn't move out because they couldn't get loans to get better homes. So they stayed in these areas, and industry wouldn't come because these were poor areas. Businesses wouldn't come. Poor area. I mean, some might have, but for the most part, major industry and businesses that would transform those areas wouldn't come into those areas. And as a result, they remain poor. And it's a whole other thing. I can't go into redlining, but all I did was show that, okay, white folks weren't redlined. Black people were. Communities to this very day are suffering as a result of it. The article. You can go to the Washington Post. Red lines was banned 50 years ago. It's still hurting minorities today. Okay? White privilege, folks. Black folks got redlined. White people didn't. Why? Because they were the ruling class. Why? Because You make, when you are the ruling class, you make rules that favor. I could go so deep. I mean, so many other different ways and examples. I said I was going to do one final one. I'm going to do this quick. Another important dynamic of this privilege that we were denied in many ways, that whites. I shared this in another video. I gave the scenario. Imagine if it's 1945. 1945, black people were being lynched. It was dangerous. Like I said, ask Emmett Till about it, but you can't because he's dead. He might have would have been dead anyway, even if he lived. But he's dead because he was supposedly said to have looked at a white woman the wrong way or something, and it ended up in the bottom of the river. Okay, that's the kind of culture that black people lived in the 50s and around that period. Well, that was around close to 60. That's the kind of culture. And I won't go long on this one, but I went longer on the other video. But I asked this question. Okay, black people lived under that oppression, under that frame of mind that I got to be careful where I go, walking late at night. I got to be careful. Somebody could roll up, and it happened, folks. And the next thing you know, you swinging from a tree. Just minding your business, walking down the street in the South. These types of things happen regularly. And so, but then I asked the question, but if you're a 15-year-old young white boy, do you walk down the street worrying, looking, watching out because somebody might roll up and the next thing you know, you hanging from a tree? You didn't have that worry. A young white boy didn't have that worry. He didn't have that psychological pressure on him. Look at a white man wrong and you could be shot. Don't look me in the eye, boy, and all this. Cross the street, because if a white couple is coming, you can't be on the same side of the street as them. This is the kind of stuff that went on. White people didn't have to deal with that. Folks, that's white privilege. You were privileged not to have to deal with that crowd. But we did. So white privilege doesn't exist? He's debunked. I mean, that's a joke. God bless. I'm done.